There's a lake as wide as you could imagine, hidden in the forest surrounding my town's park. You'd never know it was there, unless you were willing to wander aimlessly through dense bushes, getting pricked by all sorts of spiky plants. Don't ask me how I became so willing to do that, but at some point I became aware of that great spectacle. The lake was as reflective as a mirror, and whenever I looked down into the water, I could swear I was seeing something that wasn't my reflection mirroring my every action. Something dark and blurry looking that watched me with pale eyes. But I never paid it any mind. After all, I'd never seen something so beautiful in my entire life. One day, one of my old friends asked me where it was that I went when I would go missing for hours. Honestly, I never really thought that I was gone for that long. It only ever felt like a few minutes went by whenever I was there before I would walk on back home. Time really seemed to fly by without me ever realizing. At first, I was reluctant to let them know about my spot. I mean, it was my special area, a place I could go to and feel disattached from the rest of the world. But I could feel a deep concern within them, and I realized that it wasn't just them who felt that way. Ever since I found that lake, everyone around me was treating me with caution, like I was a bomb about to go off. I didn't understand why they all felt this way. It's not like I was doing anything bad or anything. With a deep sigh, I told them to meet up with me once the sun was starting to go down. I always went to the lake around that time. I noticed a bead of sweat drip down their face as they nodded. Time passed and they met up with me. I didn't do much talking as we walked, but for every second that passed by without me saying a word, they tried to fill up that space with their talking as much as possible. They talked about their job, their family, how they wanted to go to Hawaii sometime. But those words went in and out of my ears like wind blowing through a net. When they finally acknowledged the fact that they weren't interesting me, they asked me what exactly I did in the area with the lake. I paused enough for them to notice. What was it that I did at the lake? I knew that I would often look at the water's surface, but everything else was a blank. I couldn't even remember what I did there the day before. My friend asked me if I was okay, and I gave a hesitant nod. I'm not the kind of person who likes to think displeasing thoughts, so I instantly dismissed the rising questions in my mind. Under my breath, I told them that I did what anyone would do at a lake. My friend, who was starting to lag behind me as we made our way through trees and around rocks, started speeding up and asked me if I enjoyed swimming in the lake. Swimming? The thought never crossed my mind. I'd never thought swimming in a lake was a good idea. There were too many unknowns, although the water was so clear that I could practically see to the bottom. Knowing that I'd never given a satisfying response for what I liked to do there, I told them that I did like to swim in it. Giving a reasonable answer like this seemed to calm them down for the first time throughout our entire walk. Finally, they stopped talking as we made our way there. The view was just as amazing as it always was. The water had an otherworldly glow to it, and the water was so still it almost didn't look like water. My friend was at a loss for words. Their eyes were fixated at the water, and they sped over to get a closer look. Over and over again, they repeated to themselves that something like this wasn't possible. They reached out their hands slowly to touch the water's surface, and with the slightest tap, they sent ripples that spread throughout it, corrupting it with its irregular pattern. They did this a couple times, and each time a nauseating feeling spread through me like poison. Before I could tell them to stop, they told me they wanted to see how well I could swim, since they'd never seen me swim before. I don't know why, but for some reason I didn't panic, even though I didn't know how to swim. I told them I didn't bring clothes for swimming, but they answered that things like that weren't necessary. In that moment, I had two main options: tell the truth, or proceed with the lie and hope I could pull it off. I was going to tell the truth, but something in the water caught my eye. It might have been the sun reflecting on the water as it was slowly but surely going down. Looking at the water, I found myself unable to tell the truth. I wanted to see if I could swim. I wanted to see just how different this lake was. I took off my shirt and shoes and approached the edge of the ground that separated the water from the earth. It seemed like such a shame to disrupt the calmness of the water, but there was nothing for it. I bent my legs down and jumped in. The water was ice cold, a great contrast with the warm weather. At first, I was sinking down in slow motion, down to the deep bottom of the lake. But then, as if my body was naturally programmed with the movement, I began to start kicking my legs and moving my arms forward and then back. And I began to rise up to the surface and swim forward. My friend gave out a cheer as I started slowly moving myself to try to get to the other side. The lake was mostly horizontal, and a lengthy horizontal at that. I estimated it would take me around 5 minutes to get to the other side. As I swam, there was this calm I felt that was colder than the water. One I didn't understand, although I wasn't complaining. I looked to my side and watched as they were following me and cheering for me to go as fast as I could. I tried to smile, but ended up getting a mouthful of water. I'd never felt so peaceful like this before. But then everything became a blur. The wind stopped blowing, the birds stopped chirping, and the whole world seemed to stop. My friend went from cheering for me to screaming at me. I couldn't tell what they were saying though. They were pointing in fear behind me, running with me as I continued swimming. In slow motion, I turned to look behind me, and for the first time that strange calmness gave way to absolute horror. About a foot behind me were bubbles floating up to the water. They were big and popping everywhere. But of course, it wasn't the bubbles I was afraid of. Looking through the crystal clear water, I could see a floating figure, a dark entity making its way to me. It was thin and humanoid looking, with eyes as clear as the water. It had no pupils, and its torso was fish-like, if like anything at all. It had lengthy arms that drifted aimlessly at its side, and it reminded me of the reflection I always saw in the mirror that was the lake. If it weren't for my friend crying out my name, I wouldn't have started moving. I flailed my arms and kicked my legs erratically as I tried to use the force to propel myself forward. But no matter how far I went, the thing seemed to be getting closer second by second. It felt so close, like it was right behind me. All I could hear was the splashing of water as I tried to get away. But I could feel it was less than a second from grabbing me. I reached out to touch the ground, but the thing grabbed onto my leg and started pulling me down. Its grasp was too strong, and there was no fighting it. It pulled down on me as I sunk deeper into the water's abyss. As I lost oxygen, I could feel a chill make its way through my body, starting from my feet on up. I was losing my will to live. But suddenly, I could feel something pulling me up. It pulled, not with as much force as the creature, but it somehow managed to pull me out of the water. I gagged out water as I laid on the ground, gasping desperately for air. My friend rubbed my back, asking if I was okay. The calmness inside me was back. After lying for a minute, we slowly approached the water to see where the creature was. It was gone. The water was calm again, as though nothing ever happened. My friend went to me and said they were glad it left. I guess I felt the same way too. Thinking about it, the way the monster moved, it wasn't like it was swimming through water. It was like a reflection moving through glass. My friend told me that they should leave and never turn again. Without saying anything in response, I watched as they slowly started walking back home. Before I began to walk with them, I once again approached the water's surface. The lake was as reflective as a mirror, and whenever I looked down into the water, I could swear I was seeing something that wasn't my reflection mirroring my every action. Something dark and blurry looking that watched me with pale eyes. But I never paid it any mind. After all, I'd never seen something so beautiful in my entire life. Besides, it would never have its freedom ever again. I live in a place where it's always winter. The snow never stops falling, and the wind keeps changing the shape of everything. Imagine days where sunshine is rare, and the clouds are always full of snowflakes that on calmer days gently float down, and on wilder days shoot out like bullets. That was the normal weather of the area I live in. My name is Eric, and I have a small house in the woods where it's always quiet, except for the sound of the snow. I work at a place in town where we make things out of metal. I use a hammer and work with fire, and that's honestly the warmest part of the day, since the rest would be filled with cold. I'm sure you know how it goes. For numerous hours, I will work on making tools of various sizes that would be used by the community. When it starts to get dark, I put on multiple layers of warm clothing and head for home. I use the light from the moon in my lantern to see. But it wouldn't take me long to realize neither the moon nor the lantern would help me see where I was going on this very night. Without warning, the snow was coming down really hard, and I couldn't tell what direction I was walking in. It already took me more than an hour to get home, so this storm was likely going to make me take hours to get back. But as I stumbled my way forward, fighting against the wrestling wind and pelting snowflakes, something strange happened. The storm was so strong that I couldn't see much. But then, in the far-off distance in front of me, I saw something huge. It was big and furry, moving through the snow with slight ease. It was shaped like a lengthy polar bear standing on two legs, but was greatly disfigured. Its movements were slow, ragged, unnatural, and the way it navigated through the storm made it clear that the storm had no real effect on it. I couldn't tell where it was going, or if I was even seeing properly. because, again, the storm was costing me my vision and threatening to blow me away. My skin was freezing at a rapid rate, and I was feeling numbness spread throughout my body like a poison. I figured in my current state of mind, I was likely hallucinating. But then, suddenly, the figure stopped and turned to look in some direction that was likely towards me. I mean, I could feel something with piercing eyes staring at me with a look of intensity. The creature tilted its head back and roared so loud that I felt it in the ground. I don't even think I can really begin to describe just what it was that I heard. I just know I was so scared that I couldn't move for a moment. But that could have been the numbness. I shook my legs and forced them to move, and I ran as fast as I could through the storm. I didn't know if the big thing was chasing me, but I kept running. As I ran, my breathing became more ragged and worn, and I felt extreme exhaustion and stress. I finally somehow managed to get home and close the door really fast. I was safe inside, hopefully anyways, but I was still shaking because I was so scared. Although, again, that could have been because of the snow and wind. I tracked in a huge amount of snow that had stuck to me like glue. The next day, I frantically told people about what I saw, but not many people believed me. They thought it was just a story I'd made up, or some illusion I thought I saw that wasn't real. But one person actually believed me, or just made it seem that way. They said there's an old story about a creature called the Frostwalker. It's made of snow and ice and wanders around whenever the weather conditions are perfect. A perfect amount of ice, snow, and wind. I'm not sure I believe that's the monster I saw, but I do know that I certainly didn't make it up, no matter what anyone says. I know I saw the creature, and I won't ever forget. Now, whenever it snows a lot, I think about that encounter and the scary noises it made. Although, strangely, my area never got that kind of snow again. We've had many that have happened after my encounter, but none were as fierce and powerful. It's a story I'll always remember, especially on these cold, snowy nights that are always common in my town. It was a regular evening after work, and I was in my room, feeling happy and calm. I also remember feeling fatigued because work had been a little stressful, although that was typical for me. I just finished reading a book and was about to turn off the light when a loud bang made me jump. It was the sound of my front door being thrown open with force. And when I say force, I mean immense force, like something you'd expect from a monster. My heart started to beat fast, and I felt terrified. A million thoughts raced through my mind, but I couldn't process any of them, and all I knew was that they were not positive. Then came another noise, the sound of glass shattering and falling to the floor. It was coming from downstairs. I knew right away that someone or something had entered my house without permission, and I was afraid they might be there to do something bad. Did I say might? No, they were here to do something bad. To make things worse, I had nothing to defend myself with, and my phone wasn't with me since I'd been trying to use less technology throughout the week. I got up from my bed as quietly as I could and tiptoed to my bedroom door. I gently pushed it closed, hoping the person wouldn't hear it. I knew it wouldn't keep them out for long, but it gave me a little bit of time and temporary peace of mind. I looked around for a place to hide, feeling anxiety like never before, and decided on my closet. It was big and full of clothes that I could hide behind, although it might seem like an obvious spot to whoever had broken in. I went inside and sat down on the floor, pulling the clothes around me so I couldn't be seen. From a small gap, I could see into my room, and I was feeling a staggering amount of apprehension. I had left my phone in the bathroom because I didn't want any distractions. Now, I wished I had it with me to call the police. Without any guarantee that someone would come to my rescue, I either had to stay hiding, give in to the demands of the person, or fight back, and neither option made me feel better about my situation. It was fly or fall. There were no other choices. I felt alone and very frightened. Silent, slow footsteps were coming up the stairs. They were heavy, but quiet at the same time, perhaps a sign that the person was experienced. I could tell they were taking their time, searching each room carefully and efficiently. They likely knew that they couldn't afford anyone in the house to live, or else they'd be caught. Finally, they came into my room. It was a person wearing a dark hood and carrying a very used-looking wooden bat. There were all kinds of ominous stains concentrated on the end of it, revealing the long and dark history of its use. I hoped I wouldn't contribute to its horrendous look. They moved around, looking under the bed and behind the curtains. They were so close to me, and I tried hard not to make a single sound. I held my breath, hoping that somehow I could force myself to stop breathing for at least 10 minutes. The person stopped and turned towards the closet. It seems they didn't really notice it before and were determined to investigate it. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure they could hear it. They took a step closer and then another. Just as they reached out to open the closet door, police sirens filled the air outside. I almost cried out in relief, but I quickly remembered the urgency of the situation. The timing was perfect. The person in the hood stopped. It seemed like they were calculating the chance that they could fight off the police after taking a little bit more time to search around. They looked around the room quickly, then ran out as fast as they could. I stayed in the closet, not moving, not making a sound, until I was sure they were gone. The police came into my room a few minutes later. They told me my neighbor had seen the person break into my house and called them. The police had arrived quickly, but the person had escaped. Figures. That night changed everything for me. I couldn't stop thinking about the person with the hood and the wooden bat. They hadn't stolen anything. So that could have meant they were looking for a person. For me. But that couldn't be right. It just couldn't. I was way more careful after that, always making sure my doors were locked and my phone was with me. But I always felt a little bit scared, especially when I heard loud noises. The memory of that night stayed with me, reminding me to always be aware of my surroundings, even if it's my own home. If that person had broken in looking for me, it's likely that they'd be back with that horrible bat they were carrying. I never thought a simple errand could turn into a nightmare. It had been just another mundane Monday when Miss Jenkins, my history teacher, suddenly handed me an ancient-looking book to return to the library. I didn't want to return the book, but Miss Jenkins is a strict teacher who will hold a long-lasting grudge against you for any little thing, and I didn't feel like getting on her bad side. Not to mention, I was a little kid then, and during that time, teachers' words were just as strong as a parent's. That means it was law. The library was on the other side of the school, which meant I had to pass through the old wing, a place every child, teacher, every person whispered about but never dared to explore. It was this creepy area where all sorts of rumors about ghosts and missing kids were made. Honestly, it freaked me out so much I never went through there, and most other kids avoided it too, even the teachers. There was this dark energy there, as though something evil was constantly lurking, waiting for a poor person to be the next victim. The hallway was dimly lit, with each bulb flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and old paper. As I walked, the silence was so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. I clutched the book tightly, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. I would have asked someone else to come with me, but I knew no one would have wanted to. They abandoned me, written me off as another rumor that would be spread. These thoughts terrified me as they crossed my mind, but the faster I did this, the better. Then I heard it, a low growl that seemed to come from the shadows. I froze, my eyes scanning the darkness. It sounded like an animal. Honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if a bear suddenly came crawling out of the darkness. Slowly, a hulking figure with fur as black as the void it emerged from came out from hiding, a couple classrooms away from me. I looked at it and instantly thought of werewolves, but this thing was unbelievably huge, especially to a small child like me, so I knew it just had to be something more. Some of its features seemed humanoid, but the proportions were so out of place, and it was very rapid and wild looking. Its eyes glowed a fierce yellow, and its breath came out in ragged snarls as it crept down the hallway and into a classroom. It didn't seem to have noticed me, although my trembling was pretty obvious. Panic seized me. I dropped the book and ran as fast as humanly possible back to Miss Jenkins. In that moment, nothing I was doing mattered anymore. I swore to myself I would never go down the hallway again. Out of breath, I blurted out what I'd seen to her and my other classmates, who didn't laugh at me because my horrified expression looked incredibly genuine. She gave me a skeptical look, but agreed to investigate. She wanted me to come along, just in case I was trying to prank her, and so I reluctantly agreed. But if it attacked, I couldn't guarantee I wouldn't abandon her. We returned to the old wing, our steps echoing in the empty space. The classroom was completely empty of all things paranormal. There were desks in rows, a blank chalkboard, but no sign of the monster. Miss Jenkins sighed, a mix of relief and annoyance on her face. It had to have been your imagination, she said. I knew that she didn't believe in that suggestion, I know what I saw. And as we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows, the creature was watching. This was the only creature and paranormal encounter I've had in that school. And honestly, everyone there knows that something's not right, especially the teachers. But the school keeps going, and no one on the outside will believe anything we say. To think, even now, there's evil brewing in that school, snatching both students and teachers alike. I'll never return there again. The rain was pounding so hard, you'd think someone was banging on the walls throughout the house. Every now and then, flashes of light would fill the windows as lightning would go off, and once it was done, the world would go back to being pitch black again. It was about 2 a.m., and the hunger pangs wouldn't let me sleep. I personally thought I'd eaten well throughout the day, but with my stomach grumbling so heavily, I couldn't argue against it. Once I could no longer deny the fact that I was starving and craved some good food, I decided to order a pizza through Uber Eats, hoping the comfort food would help me settle. Stumbling through the dark hallway, I made my way over to the living room and picked up the phone I'd left on the couch. The brightness as I turned it on almost made me go blind, so I adjusted it and started making my order. The rain was starting to let up, but I wasn't sure if there'd really be anyone who'd pick up my order. But the desire to have pizza held strong inside me, so I wasn't going to give up that easily. At last, the app notified me that my order was picked up quickly and that the estimated delivery time was eerily fast. But strangely, the icon on the tracker wasn't going anywhere. I waited 5 minutes, then another 5 minutes. I tried reloading the page, but again the icon wasn't working. It was likely a glitch due to the storm or something else, I thought to myself. But the page started glitching on me to the point where everything was frozen, and I couldn't even turn off my phone. Just as my frustration was reaching its peak, I noticed that at some point the screen changed to let me know that my order had arrived. What? When? Looking out the window, I couldn't see any cars or anyone, but the tracker showed that they were right in front of my house. Nervously, I tossed on a jacket and opened my front door. I almost cried out in shock. When looking out the window before, there was nothing there. But now, I could see a big black car parked in front of my house. Even if it was black though, I'm sure I would have noticed. Something I did notice, however, was that no lights were on inside the car. It wasn't because their windows were tinted or anything, because when the car door opened, the lights weren't on then either. I descended down my stairs at a very slow pace as I waited for someone to emerge from the darkness in the car with my order. Although now, I was reluctant to actually take it. A figure shrouded in a black hoodie and a dark face mask almost seemed to float smoothly out the car. They held a pizza box in one hand, silently took a few steps, and held it out for me to come and take it. They were 8 or 9 feet away from me. I wasn't going to come and take it from them. The last thing I wanted was for me to come close enough so that others could attack me or something. I was not going to assume that they were the only ones in the car. "Excuse me, could you come over and bring that to me?" I asked with the politeness I really had to try and muster. I couldn't see the person's face, but I could tell they felt annoyed by what I said. Even so, they walked, without making a single sound, to me and held out the box once more. I took the box, and as I did, they looked up slightly. I couldn't see their face, but their eyes were a piercing, unnatural blue that seemed to just glow paranormally. I muttered a thanks and closed the door, but as I walked away, I heard a whisper. "Enjoy your last meal." Chills ran down my spine, and my eyes widened as I felt apprehensive. I looked through the peephole in my door, but the car was gone without making a single sound. By now, the rain had completely come to a stop, so not even the noise of rain was present anymore. The air held this dry feeling of fear that made me think that something greater than I could ever know just happened. Or perhaps that was just me. I still couldn't believe that neither the sound of footsteps from the delivery driver nor the sound of the car's engine had been heard. I opened the pizza box. Everything was there like it should have been. The pizza looked really delicious, but I threw the box away, locked all the doors, and spent the night with all the lights on. The next day, I opened my door to go outside and remember the events that had happened when something caught my eye. On my door, which hadn't been there before, were claw marks that looked like they were made from a sharp object. Later on, I would notice freaky fingerprints on my windows and would have to make an important decision. I awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. My leg, encased in plaster, was a constant reminder of my vulnerability. It didn't hurt as much as before, but every now and then I could feel it throbbing harshly. The hospital room, usually a flurry of white coats and soft-soled shoes, was oddly quiet in the dead of night, which was something I was grateful for, since I didn't feel like listening to constant chatter at the moment. I had broken my leg after falling down a long set of stairs, and after lying in gruesome pain, someone called the hospital for me. It was a sharp break in the bones, an odd crunch that reverberated through my body and took my breath away. Since I lived in a house alone, I at least had peace of mind that no one would be frantically worrying about me unless I said something. While I gave a long, fatigued sigh, I heard the rumbling of something, maybe a truck, suddenly start up. I expected the noise to go away after a few minutes, but instead it started getting louder, stronger. This was no truck or large vehicle coming by. This was something else. Without warning, the earth began to tremble. The gentleness of the rumbling soon gave way to violence. The entire building felt like it was being thrusted into the air before it fell back down again. The walls groaned, the floor buckled, and the ceiling tiles danced chaotically above me. I was alone, my calls for help swallowed by the roar of the crumbling world around me. The bed jolted, wheels screeching as it slid across the floor. My heart pounded against my chest, each beat screaming survival. The window shattered, showering me with glass, and the lights flickered, casting monstrous shadows that clawed their way towards me. I couldn't think clearly because It was all happening so suddenly. I knew that this was an earthquake, but I was unprepared as to what to do because this was my first time experiencing one. Then the unthinkable happened. The ceiling split open, a gaping maw ready to swallow me whole. I watched, helpless, as a slab of concrete descended, its shadow growing over me like the Grim Reaper's cloak. In a desperate act, I threw my body to the side, the cast on my leg a cumbersome weight. The slab crashed down, missing me by mere inches, pulverizing the bed where I had lain seconds before. It seemed as though some good being was looking out for me. Either that, or I had just been blessed by a miracle I would never forget. Silence returned, as sudden as the quake had been. I laid there, amidst the rubble, panting and slightly bruised, but alive. The taste of dust and fear was thick in my mouth, but it was the silence that was truly horrifying. It was the silence of a grave, a tomb for the living, and I was its unwilling occupant. I wondered if everyone else in the hospital had managed to survive the earthquake, or if I had been the only one. These thoughts haunted me, but I had to focus on getting to a safer area. There are typically aftershocks, smaller earthquakes that occur after the main one. I remember hearing my teacher say when I was younger and learning about natural disasters in my class. Aftershocks, huh? Then I'll have to be very aware and hope that they don't strike when I'm weakest, like this one did. The day had been oppressively hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and the pavement sticky underfoot. I had just stepped out of the grocery store, my mind preoccupied with the mundane task of putting away the groceries. But as I pushed the cart towards my car, I felt a sudden drop in temperature and the sky darkened ominously. I looked up to see the clouds roiling into a monstrous formation, the color of bruises and deep despair. A siren began to wail in the distance, a harbinger of the chaos to come. People spilled out of the store behind me, their faces etched with fear as they too saw the behemoth that was the tornado tearing across the land towards us. Panic erupted, shouts and screams pierced the air as everyone scrambled for safety. I abandoned my cart and sprinted to my car, the keys shaking in my hand. I could hear the roar now, a deafening, soul-shaking cacophony that drowned out the cries around me. I managed to start the car and floored the accelerator, but the tornado was upon us. It was like being in the grip of a giant. The car lifted and buffeted as if it were no more than a toy. Windows shattered, sending glass flying like deadly confetti. I could feel the car being torn apart, the metal groaning in protest. For a moment, I was sure it was the end. The world was a blur of wind and debris, and I could feel the car being pulled towards the vortex. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the pressure eased. I didn't hesitate. I drove as fast as I could, steering through the chaos, away from the relentless pull of the tornado. When I finally stopped, miles away, the silence was surreal. I stepped out of the battered car, my legs weak but holding. Behind me, the town was unrecognizable, a landscape of destruction where homes and lives had been uprooted and scattered without mercy. I stood there, amidst the wreckage of what had been an ordinary day, feeling a mix of relief and profound sorrow. I had survived, but at what cost? The town was in ruins, and the lives of those I knew would never be the same. The tornado had passed, but it had left its mark on us all, a reminder of how fragile life truly is. I I remember it like it was yesterday. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun began to set, and there was a chill in the air that told us winter was on its way. It had been weeks since any of us had seen Tyler, and we were getting worried. He was the kind of guy who would vanish for a couple of days, sure, but this was definitely different. His phone went straight to voicemail, and no one had seen him at school. "Let's just go over to his place," I suggested to my friends as we sat on the worn-out couch in my living room, trying to decide what to do with our evening. Mia, always the cautious one, frowned. What if he doesn't want to be found? Lucas, ever the optimist, chimed in. Then at least we'll know he's okay. He's probably just been caught up in some new video game or something. Zoe, who had been quiet, nodded in agreement. "I think we should check on him. It's not like Tyler to be gone this long without a word." So, we set out, the four of us, walking through our small town as the last light of day faded. Tyler's house was on the outskirts, near the woods, and as we approached, something felt off. Even though his house has always been in a creepy area, it still held a laid-back, peaceful energy. So this new feeling had us all feeling apprehensive. The front gate creaked ominously in the wind, and the path to the front door was overgrown with weeds. "Tyler?" I called out as we stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under our feet. No answer. The front door was slightly open, which was strange. Tyler's family was super careful about locking up. We pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Dust motes floated in the beams of light that pierced the darkness. It looked like no one had been home for a while. "Guys, look at this," Mia said, holding up an envelope from a pile of unopened mail. The date on it was from over a month ago. We called out for Tyler and his parents, checking every room, but the house was empty of anyone. It almost felt like no one had lived there for years, but we all knew better. That's when we heard it, a noise from the backyard that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like a whisper, but it was calling my name. It actually sounded like Tyler's voice, if he had been sleep-deprived for decades and was about to lose his voice. We rushed to the back door and peered out into the growing darkness. It was so dark outside that we couldn't tell what had made the noise. But as something moved ever so slightly, we began to notice the thing that had spoken. And that's when we saw it, a figure not quite human, standing at the edge of the woods. Its eyes reflected the little light there was, and it whispered our names again, a sick imitation of Tyler's voice. The thing looked fleshy, but some of its skin looked a little torn and stretched out. Actually, it might not have been its skin. It was wearing it like clothing that didn't fit quite right. And with every sudden twitch it made, little cracking and squishing noises could be heard. I'll be honest, I could barely see the thing, so what I thought I saw might not be what it really was. I will say though, it was a freak of nature. Fear gripped my heart, and it seemed like I was the only one with any courage. Everyone else was stunned, as though they couldn't think anymore. All eyes were glued to the thing that looked like it was about to rush at us at lightning speed. "Run!" I yelled, and we didn't hesitate. We bolted out of the house, not stopping until we reached the safety of the streetlights. While we ran, I could have sworn I heard the creature try to follow behind us, but it must have given up. It let out a mixed blend of voices, all yelling for us to come back. One voice was definitely Tyler's, and it was the last thing we heard from that thing that night. Out of breath, we decided to go to Mr. Henderson's house. He was a retired cop and would know what to do. We told him everything, and he called the police right away. The cops searched Tyler's house and the woods, but they never found him or his family. They've been missing ever since, and no one knows what happened to them. Of course, it seems obvious now what likely happened to them. After some searching, we found out that the monster we'd encountered was likely a skinwalker. We never went back to the house, and at night, when the wind howls, I can still hear that voice calling out to me, trying to lure me back. I'm not foolish enough to try to go against that thing. Tyler would want us to learn from these events and do everything we can to prevent them from ever happening again. If you ever suddenly hear a voice from a friend that's gone missing and you don't see the person, think twice before trying to follow it. These creatures will work against your senses. They're also not afraid of us, and why would they be? They can disappear into the night in an instant and seem to be very strong. And they wear people like clothes until they decide they want to have a new outfit. Please, don't end up being that new outfit. The night was unusually quiet as Jake and I walked through our neighborhood, the only sound being our footsteps echoing off the pavement. Streetlights cast long shadows and a chill hung in the air. We were discussing plans for the weekend when a sudden movement caught our eye. A dark figure stood a good distance away, hunched over something on the ground. Just seeing that was enough to tell me that something was definitely going on. My neighborhood has always been peaceful. We don't get many strange events. I remember stopping Jake before he could keep walking because he hadn't been aware of our surroundings. He often never knew what was going on until it was right up in his face. The person, if it was one, was making guttural, groaning noises that sent shivers down my spine. It was like it came from a demon or something. To put it into terms you might be able to visualize, it was like a blend of sharp, exhaling sighs that kept going seemingly without end. "Hey, are you okay?" Jake called out, his voice betraying a hint of concern. I almost felt annoyed at him that he'd said anything at all. We could have tried to make a getaway before the person noticed us. The figure didn't respond, just continued its unsettling feast. I still hesitate to wonder what exactly it was that the person was eating, though I do remember it looked stringy, pale, and smelled like roadkill. Fresh roadkill. We took a few cautious steps backwards, not wanting to intrude, but also unable to tear our eyes away from the scene. That's when the chaotic moments happened. The figure slowly rose, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it turned around, the dim light revealed its grotesque appearance. The flesh seemed twisted, hanging off the bone in a way that was profoundly wrong. Its eyes were glazed over, devoid of life, yet they fixed on us with a predatory glare. Only time I've ever been stared at like that was when Jake was starving and wanted the last slice of pizza I had in my hand. In a moment of pure terror, it lunged forward, arms outstretched, ready to grab us. Instinctively, we turned and ran, sprinting in opposite directions. After all, our houses weren't in the same areas. I could hear the creature's ragged breaths behind me, its footsteps, and they were bare footsteps, pounding on the pavement. I didn't dare look back, as much as I wanted to, my heart pounding in my chest as I navigated the familiar streets that suddenly felt like a labyrinth. It was pretty dark that night. Eventually, I burst through my front door, panting and shaking, not sure if I had escaped or if the creature was still out there. I waited, agonizing minutes ticking by, until finally Jake called. He was home, safe. We talked about what we saw, trying to make sense of it, but we couldn't. Once more the neighborhood was silent, but the memory of that twisted, hungry gaze haunted us, leaving us to wonder where the strange figure had gone, and if it would return. Although, of course, we both hoped that that would never happen again. I'm still definitely terrified, and I haven't been the same since. The old school building stood like a relic of the past, its walls echoing with the memories of generations. As a security guard, I'd grown accustomed to its silent corridors and creaking floors. The night shift was usually uneventful, just me, my flashlight, and hours of silence. But there was one night that remains etched in my memory, a night when the stillness was shattered by something unexplainable. It began as a whisper of unease, a feeling that crept up my spine as I made my routine checks. The doors were all locked, the windows secured, yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. As the hours ticked by, the building seemed to come alive. The distant slam of a door echoed through the empty halls, a sound that should have been impossible. I checked the security monitors, but they showed nothing amiss. I ventured down the corridors, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, the flashlight in my hand casting a pool of light that seemed too feeble against the enveloping darkness. The air grew colder as I approached the source of the noise, a chill that seeped through my uniform and settled in my bones. I found myself outside the old gymnasium, its double doors looming before me like the gates to another world. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But it was my job to ensure the building was secure, so I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The gym was shrouded in shadows, the moonlight streaming through the high windows, casting an otherworldly glow. I scanned the room, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the dust motes dancing in the air. And then I heard it, a soft giggle, the sound of a child's laughter, coming from the far end of the gym. My heart raced as I turned toward the sound, my rational mind struggling to find a logical explanation. There was no one there, no sign of life in the vast space. I took a step forward, and the laughter stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. I was about to leave, to write it off as a figment of my imagination, when I saw it, a shadow that seemed to detach itself from the wall. It was darker than the darkness around it, a void where no light could penetrate. It moved with a fluid grace, its form shifting and changing as I watched, frozen in place. The shadow crept closer, and I could feel a malevolent presence emanating from it. It was then that I realized this was no ordinary shadow. It was something else, something ancient and terrible. I felt a fear take hold, a fear that rooted me to the spot, even as every instinct urged me to flee. But then the survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I bolted for the doors. I could feel the shadows gaze on my back, a weight that threatened to drag me down. I didn't look back, not until I was safely outside, the cool night air a balm to my frayed nerves. I still work at the school, the memory of that night a constant shadow at the edge of my consciousness. I don't know what I saw, or if it will ever return, but I do know one thing. The darkness holds more than just the absence of light, and some things are beyond any understanding. As I walk the halls each night, I can't help but wonder what secrets the old building hides, and what other mysteries might reveal themselves in the quiet of the night. I awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. My leg, encased in plaster, was a constant reminder of my vulnerability. It didn't hurt as much as before, but every now and then I could feel it throbbing harshly. The hospital room, usually a flurry of white coats and soft-soled shoes, was oddly quiet in the dead of night, which was something I was grateful for, since I didn't feel like listening to constant chatter at the moment. I had broken my leg after falling down a long set of stairs, and after lying in gruesome pain, someone called the hospital for me. It was a sharp break in the bones, an odd crunch that reverberated through my body and took my breath away. Since I lived in a house alone, I at least had peace of mind that no one would be frantically worrying about me unless I said something. While I gave a long, fatigued sigh, I heard the rumbling of something, maybe a truck, suddenly start up. I expected the noise to go away after a few minutes, but instead it started getting louder, stronger. This was no truck or large vehicle coming by. This was something else. Without warning, the earth began to tremble. The gentleness of the rumbling soon gave way to violence. The entire building felt like it was being thrusted into the air before it fell back down again. The walls groaned, the floor buckled, and the ceiling tiles danced chaotically above me. I was alone, my calls for help swallowed by the roar of the crumbling world around me. The bed jolted, wheels screeching as it slid across the floor. My heart pounded against my chest, each beat screaming survival. The window shattered, showering me with glass, and the lights flickered, casting monstrous shadows that clawed their way towards me. I couldn't think clearly because it was all happening so suddenly. I knew that this was an earthquake, but I was unprepared as to what to do because this was my first time experiencing one. Then the unthinkable happened. The ceiling split open, a gaping maw ready to swallow me whole. I watched, helpless, as a slab of concrete descended, its shadow growing over me like the Grim Reaper's cloak. In a desperate act, I threw my body to the side, the cast on my leg a cumbersome weight. The slab crashed down, missing me by mere inches, pulverizing the bed where I had lain seconds before. It seemed as though some good being was looking out for me. Either that, or I had just been blessed by a miracle I would never forget. Silence returned, as sudden as the quake had been. I laid there, amidst the rubble, panting and slightly bruised, but alive. The taste of dust and fear was thick in my mouth, but it was the silence that was truly horrifying. It was the silence of a grave, a tomb for the living, and I was its unwilling occupant. I wondered if everyone else in the hospital had managed to survive the earthquake, or if I had been the only one. These thoughts haunted me, but I had to focus on getting to a safer area. There are typically aftershocks, smaller earthquakes that occur after the main one. I remember hearing my teacher say when I was younger and learning about natural disasters in my class. Aftershocks, huh? Then I'll have to be very aware and hope that they don't strike when I'm weakest, like this one did. The day had been oppressively hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and the pavement sticky underfoot. I had just stepped out of the grocery store, my mind preoccupied with the mundane task of putting away the groceries. But as I pushed the cart towards my car, I felt a sudden drop in temperature and the sky darkened ominously. I looked up to see the clouds roiling into a monstrous formation, the color of bruises and deep despair. A siren began to wail in the distance, a harbinger of the chaos to come. People spilled out of the store behind me, their faces etched with fear as they too saw the behemoth that was the tornado tearing across the land towards us. Panic erupted, shouts and screams pierced the air as everyone scrambled for safety. I abandoned my cart and sprinted to my car, the keys shaking in my hand. I could hear the roar now, a deafening, soul-shaking cacophony that drowned out the cries around me. I managed to start the car and floored the accelerator, but the tornado was upon us. It was like being in the grip of a giant. The car lifted and buffeted as if it were no more than a toy. Windows shattered, sending glass flying like deadly confetti. I could feel the car being torn apart, the metal groaning in protest. For a moment, I was sure it was the end. The world was a blur of wind and debris, and I could feel the car being pulled towards the vortex. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the pressure eased. I didn't hesitate. I drove as fast as I could, steering through the chaos, away from the relentless pull of the tornado. When I finally stopped, miles away, the silence was surreal. I stepped out of the battered car, my legs weak but holding. Behind me, the town was unrecognizable, a landscape of destruction where homes and lives had been uprooted and scattered without mercy. I stood there, amidst the wreckage of what had been an ordinary day, feeling a mix of relief and profound sorrow. I had survived, but at what cost? The town was in ruins, and the lives of those I knew would never be the same. The tornado had passed, but it had left its mark on us all, a reminder of how fragile life truly is. I think you'd be surprised just how far a person is willing to go in order to get some respect. And it can be so far that there's no going back, for them and for those around them. That person was me, at the young age of 17. You see, once I really started developing my social personality in middle school, it became pretty clear to everyone that I was the shy type. Somebody who liked to lay low and blend in, rather than stand out. You might think that that's okay, and it really is, but not so much for boys, at least boys at my school. If you didn't show that you had guts, they were onto you, and I mean like a pack of hungry wolves. And while they never beat me up, they did insult me a lot and gave me a paranoia that has never left me. I strongly believe that insults can and will hurt more than physical torment, and it certainly left its mark. Anyways, once I started my years in high school, I knew I had to change, and that this was my chance to be known for being strong, courageous, and worthy of being respected. No person would ever dream of bullying me anymore. I cut my hair to look cooler, wore tougher looking clothing, and even tried to train myself using YouTube videos on how to become mentally stronger. I know my parents must have found my sudden change strange because they never knew anything about my being bullied. And I didn't think they needed to know anyways. I was going to solve this problem on my own and prove to everyone that I wasn't going to be messed with anymore. But life doesn't work wonders like that, and it's TV's fault for always making the impossible seem possible. I went into high school and got bullied regardless, and by new people. They made fun of how I tried to look like something I wasn't, and I found out the horrific truth that you can never hide what's really inside. I just was what I was, and there wasn't actually a problem with it. It was the rude people that were the problem. But I didn't understand that then and got really fed up. So fed up that I said something really stupid to them during lunch. The conversation went something like this. A group of tall, condescending guys were calling me names not suitable for children, and one of them told me that I was weak for not saying anything back. I told them angrily that I wasn't weak, and they started laughing rudely. That only got me more fired up. I told them that they were the ones who were weak, along with some other comments that immediately got their attention, and I could see their faces turning a dark red. I didn't even think that was even possible for a human to do. Then again, I've long doubted they were human. The leader of the guys put his hands up to signal for his friends and himself to calm down, and surprisingly they did. Then, he slowly walked to me, standing uncomfortably close to my face, and through gritted teeth, told me since I thought I was such a tough guy, that I should put my money where my mouth is and prove it. Being a quick thinker, I thought of the perfect plan. My parents were going to be going out tonight, and once they were gone, I would invite the guys over to play the midnight game. A game I was told by my parents' friends when I was younger. Knowing that it was just a lame thing told to spook kids, I would try to scare them myself, while making it seem like I was being brave and cool throughout the whole game. With them acting so scared, they'd realize that I was tougher than them, and I'd get non-stop respect from not just them, but maybe even the whole school. Word spreads faster than you can blink in high school, and you'd better remember that. That was my plan, and while it might not have been perfect, I'd say, in a way, it got the job done. But I'm not sure you'll agree after hearing what happened. Eager to prove me wrong, they all agreed to come over around 11 p.m. when it was dark, which was perfect because the game works best in the dark anyways. I'll be honest, I never felt more excited in my whole life. I was going to scare the life out of them. As soon as the lights went out, I would sneak up on them and get revenge. My parents left out and never told me I couldn't have friends over because they knew I had no friends at all, meaning I technically wasn't breaking any rules. I got out an old Halloween mask of a creepy bloody goblin that could easily scare the bravest of people, and an oversized black coat that would hide the rest of my body. With it being dark, I was sure that all they would see was a horrific creature that looked ready to attack. In my pocket, I kept a plastic toy knife that looked awfully realistic to use to scare them as well. Finally, darkness fell over the sky, and I waited for them to come. I heard the doorbell ring and welcomed them in. They looked mischievous and full of themselves, which was perfect. We gathered in a circle in the living room, sitting on the floor, and it took a while for them to finally shut up. In order to prove just how not weak I am and just how weak you guys are, we're going to play the midnight game. You guys know how to play? I asked. Most of the guys said yeah, but one of them shook their heads with a grin, asking me to explain it. Well, first we get out a piece of paper, I said. I'd already placed one on one of the couches, and I picked it up and sat back down in the group. In the actual ritual, you'd use your own blood to write your name, but we don't. Before I could finish talking, the leader of the guys took a short but really sharp knife. I backed away so quickly I didn't expect it. I yelled at the guy what he thought he was doing, and he looked at me like I was the one who was crazy. He said that all of us would be writing our names in blood, just like the ritual went, and stabbed himself in the finger. You could see the pain on his face, clear as day, and although it took a bit, he wrote his name in small letters on the paper. He then passed the knife around to the others, and they did the same, except one who said that he didn't actually want to do it. The leader called him a chicken and the guy left in a rush. Honestly, it was pretty disturbing to see them all do it, and I was surprised to see that one of the guys was prepared and had brought bandages for them to use. "Well," the leader said, "we're all here to prove how tough we are. What about you?" That's when things got real. It wasn't just gonna be a joke. They really wanted to go through with this. I tentatively grabbed the knife, sitting back in my spot. My hands shook with a ferocity I'd never known before. I told myself it'd be okay, but my body knew that it was not. Come on, I thought to myself. This is what it takes to earn respect, to be a brave person. If you can't do this, you'll be known as a weakling forever. I decided that I might not feel the pain as much if I did it quickly, so I stabbed my hand as quick as I could, but I was absolutely wrong. In fact, the pain might have been stronger because I did it fast. For the next 10 seconds, I gripped my hand in intense pain. I watched as blood dripped like rain from my hand and onto the floor. Someone passed the paper my way so I could write my name quickly. Slowly, I lowered my hand towards the paper and tried my best to write my name without wincing too much. My hand started throbbing uncontrollably, but at least somebody gave me a bandage so that I could heal. Everybody in the room took a few minutes to look at the paper, at what we'd done. I had initially planned for us to just use a pencil to write our names, but it seemed like peer pressure had other plans, an unfortunate weakness of mine. The paper was stained with speckles of dark red, and our names dripped onto each other a little bit. It was a horrid sight, to say the least. You'd think we were trying to summon a demon or something. It was 11:50 when we finally finished writing our names in blood. In the ritual, after placing the paper in front of a closed door and lighting a candle, you're supposed to knock 21 times and then once more at exactly 12 a.m. No minute more, no minute less. I figured the basement door would be the scariest option, and because I knew that the ritual wasn't actually real, I wasn't feeling afraid or anything like that. To me, in that moment, the scariest thing would be us actually writing our names in blood. The rest would just be a prank I play on them. But you're hearing this story of mine because you know that's not what would happen. And so, me and the other guys stepped down the stairs and to the basement door, which was normally always locked, and I placed the paper on the floor in front of it. One of the guys brung along the candle and set it across from the paper. I asked who wanted to be the one to do the knocking, but no one offered, not even the leader. "You're the one who wanted to prove himself the most. You do it," the leader finally spoke. I nervously nodded my head and lit the candle. The guys backed away from me, standing on the stairs as I started knocking. And I'm telling you, with every knock I did, I could feel the room getting colder. Suddenly, I could feel the house's atmosphere getting more and more unsafe, and I'm pretty sure the others could feel it too. When I first started knocking, they were snickering and giggling. When I was about to stop, they were dead quiet. And if I never turned around, I would have thought I was alone. Before I did the 20-second knock, I checked my watch. It was a minute before midnight. I watched it closely, my arm ready to deliver the final knock as soon as it turned 12. But the clock didn't change. I counted 60 seconds over and over again, but the clock remained the same. Somebody behind me asked if it had turned 12 yet, and I told them that my watch was acting weird and wasn't working. The leader walked up to the basement door and checked his watch, which was saying the same thing as mine. The others that had watches checked theirs, and it was all the same thing. It was like all of time stopped. "Well, it's probably already past 12, so you might as well knock now," someone said. I moved my hand forward, but my hand stopped right before it could touch the door. Every hair on my body stood up on its end. The closer my hand was to the door, the more out of breath I was feeling. It was then that I realized. "You guys, I need to tell you something," I whispered carefully. Everyone was silent. No matter what, no one can knock one more time on this door. But all the guys started complaining instantly, calling me a scaredy cat and saying that they were just getting into it, that they hadn't had this much fun in a long time. The only guy who seemed like he agreed with me was the leader. But when his friends cheered him on to make the last knock, he took a nervous laugh and knocked once, the 20-second knock. In a split second, I looked at my watch, and what I saw terrified me. The time on the watch, on all of our watches, was 000. The lights throughout my whole house flickered off, the candle being the only light available to us. But then some unseen force blew out the candle, and on the other side of the door, something kept knocking a bunch of times, each knock louder than the last. It didn't take me long to figure it out. "Hide, before the Midnight Man is done knocking 22 times. You'd think they wouldn't believe me, but they bolted off in an instant, despite it being so dark. I followed behind and ran to somewhere slightly close by, one of my bathrooms. I shut the bathroom door and entered the closet, closing it behind me. I checked my watch and it had turned off, which meant I couldn't see a thing. I went through my memory trying to remember what happens next in the game. If my memory is correct, the door opens and the Midnight Man tries to get you while you're wandering around the dark house. Every now and then you have to move, or else he'll automatically find you, and the goal is to not be caught by him, and to relight the candle before 3:33 a.m. Or else something bad would happen. I think that he catches you if you don't. As I stood there in the dark, I knew that this wasn't a game anymore, and that I needed to relight that candle as soon as possible. But the matches used to light the candle were with one of the guys, and they were the one who didn't even know how the game worked. This was really bad, because it meant that they most likely didn't know that they were supposed to relight the candle, or that they had to avoid the Midnight Man at all costs. Bang! I heard the last knock, and the basement door creaked open slowly, most likely by itself. And I'm telling you, if there's ever a moment when you feel life-threatening fear, it's at that very moment when you realize that there's no one coming to save you, and that you were the one who put yourself in that situation in the first place. I held my breath and tried to say stiller than humanly possible. For the most part, it was quiet, way too quiet. I stayed in the closet for what I'd estimate to be half an hour, and knew that I had to move to a new location. I just couldn't risk the Midnight Man finding me. I don't think I've ever moved more quietly in my life. I opened the closet door, stopped to listen, and was about to open the bathroom door when I suddenly heard somewhat silent footsteps. I could tell someone or something was coming down the hallway, and even though it was mostly quiet, because the whole house was dead silent, it was loud, if that makes sense. Maybe it was the anxiety, but I felt that it was not human. As the footsteps approached, I slowly backed away and inched my hand towards the closet door so that I could hide back inside. The footsteps approached the bathroom door and they stopped. I was terrified out of my mind. I held my breath and didn't move an inch. Even though I couldn't see very well, somehow I saw the bathroom doorknob slowly turning, so I raced to the door and pushed my body weight against it. Some otherworldly force pushed back against the door and seemed to get more and more powerful. I struggled as the door slowly opened more and more until it was open enough for a person to stick their hand through. Just as I was about to be shoved away by the strength of the door, the Midnight Man stopped pushing against it, and I slammed the door shut. Panting and out of breath, I leaned against it and tried to regain my composure. The Midnight Man had left, for better or for worse, and I had just narrowly survived. Somewhere in the house I heard someone yelling for their life, and I recognized it as the person with the matches. I knew I didn't want to leave the safety of the bathroom, but this game needed to end. I creaked open the bathroom door and leapt out into the infinite abyss that was my house. For what felt like hours, I wandered through the hallways with fear of what could be waiting for me. It was just me, creeping stealthily through the house that I couldn't recognize anymore, and I dared not think of what might have happened to some of the guys. After wandering some more, I realized that I had made it to the kitchen. My feet could feel shiny objects littering the floor, and I could tell that someone in a panic must have made some utensils fall. I needed to be careful not to step on knives or anything sharp. As I stood there in the kitchen, a strong hand gripped around my neck, and I twisted my body in surprise. Holding a lighter with a small flickering flame, the leader of the guys used it to determine who I was and whether I was friend or foe. Although the light was small, it chased away most of the darkness in the kitchen, and I found it interesting how my eyes were adjusting to this new brightness. I looked at the guy and noticed claw marks around his face and neck. His expression showed a mixture of fear and hardship, and I'm sure that his encounter with the Midnight Man had to have been horrifying. I was so lucky it didn't try harder to get me. "What happened?" I asked. "No time. I remember the thing got some of the others. I ran, remembered I had a lighter. How do we stop the game?" The way his eyes looked in the light was kinda dark, which sounds funny, I know. Before I could answer, we both heard a door slam open and footsteps slowly walking around. We both dropped to the floor, hiding behind a counter, none of us making a peep. "All we gotta do is relight that candle before 3:33 a.m., I whispered. The footsteps seemed like they were getting closer, so I told him to close the lighter. The guy leaned back and must have scooted into a utensil or something, because it made a loud scraping sound as it slid against the floor. The footsteps stomped loud and fast, and the Midnight Man came right to the entrance of the kitchen before stopping. None of us moved. As it walked towards the right of the kitchen, I motioned for us to move to the left, slowly. It's really hard to do when there's dishes randomly scattered across the kitchen floor. Somehow, we managed to crawl out of the kitchen. We got up and started making our way to the basement. "We gotta risk it and run. It'll get us at this rate," the guy said. I agreed, and we ran as fast as we could. But as the guy was running, he fell over and yelled to me that the Midnight Man grabbed his leg and was trying to drag him away. I reached out to grab him, but he told me there was no time and slid the lighter towards my direction. I grabbed it and ran to the basement. I tried to spark a flame with the lighter, but it wasn't working, and I could feel the Midnight Man coming. It was horrible timing. I turned and saw the Midnight Man at the top of the stairs, a dark silhouette with an indescribably creepy face. You just had to be there to see how disturbing it was. It let out a silent scream, which didn't seem possible, and as it lunged toward me, the lighter finally worked and I turned my back to light the candle. The lights in the house flickered back on and the Midnight Man vanished. I felt this internal happiness, the likes of which I'd never experienced before. I went into the living room and the other guys joined me, and I gotta say, they looked out of their minds. After that moment, we all were. But most of all, we were just glad it was over. "You did it! Thank goodness," one of them said. One after another, they all started handing out praises to me, and I felt so proud of myself. But I was the one who started it all, so I didn't feel too proud. "How did you know how to end it?" they asked. I told them that the goal was to relight the candle before 3:33 a.m., which is exactly what I did. "But you didn't," someone said. I didn't get what they meant, so I checked my watch. It said 3:36 a.m. I gulped and then realized something. Wait, how did you know that it was me who relit the candle? I backed away and prepared for the worst as they all stared blankly at me. I was never the same after that moment happened, and it led me to believe that these online marketplaces are all truly shady in nature. Not that this is too important to know, but I'm basically your average old man, trying hard to see the meaning in life after living for so long. But don't think I'm that old. Apparently, I'm just getting there. Anyways, I don't believe in this new age technology that keeps getting made. Back in my day, less was more, but now it seems that more is less. People want things done yesterday, leaving people like me days behind. My son's kids would often come over and tell me how inconvenient my life must be with so little technology around. But I only have what I need, and I don't need a lot. One time, and it was this time that really started everything, they told me about this new website where you could buy almost anything that was advertised all over the place. They waved around their phones and iPads and computers my son had got them as they excitedly told me that I should order something off there. As usual, I just laughed them off, saying that there wouldn't be anything I need to buy off there. But they insisted that I at least give it a try, and if there's anything I can't stand, it's my grandchildren getting all disappointed. I told them that I would check it out later, but didn't guarantee I'd buy anything, which satisfied them. The day went by pretty quickly as I spent a good time with them and my son. I almost completely forgot about what I'd said I'd do until I was just about to go to sleep. Reluctantly, I turned on my computer and racked through my brain to remember what the website called. Oh yeah, Temu. I typed it in. The website had lots of things to buy, from random household objects to clothing. Nothing that I'd want to get, but it did look promising. I spent the next 10 minutes scrolling down through what they had to offer, believing in what my grandchildren had said. It looked convenient, legit, promising. I could see people buying from this in the future. I kept scrolling down and started noticing the more I scrolled, the more random and strange the products started to get. One showed a piece of clothing titled, "My Grandmother's Pants." Another showed a bin of Pop-Tart titled, "Used Pop-Tart." Was this some sort of joke? Just as I was beginning to gain respect, I was instantly starting to lose it. And there was one that caught my eye and made me reread the title again and again. The background of the website appeared darker and maybe glitchier around this product. It showed a picture of a dark, glitchy forest background with something standing behind a tree. It was a dark figure, and the picture had so much noise in it that you couldn't tell exactly what it was. The title of it was Pet Dogman. I was so intrigued by what the description of this product was that I clicked on it. You know when you experience a strong feeling that causes you to react without realizing it? That was basically what caused me to click on it without thinking. The description was short but interesting. It read, "One of the greatest creatures you could ever encounter. This dogman likes to roam around and explore. It also likes treats." I scrolled down to see if there were any reviews, and surprisingly there actually were. One read, "Best purchase I ever got." Another read, "I never would have believed it, but it came." I wasn't aware of the concept of fake reviews until after the whole incident occurred, so I thought that real people left them. Maybe there's the smallest possibility that some did. I highly doubt that though. I don't know what kind of demonic energy must have persuaded me to buy it. Perhaps because I didn't know what a dogman was, but I pressed buy faster than I could ever expect. Unexpectedly, it said it would arrive later tonight. Exhausted, I went to bed, hoping that with this purchase my grandchildren would be more than satisfied. That night, in the back of my head, I could hear shuffling noises somewhere in the house. At one point, I think I got up to check on the kids, saw they were okay, and went back to sleep. My son was in the room right across from mine, and he was sound asleep as well. But every time I thought I would fall completely asleep, I was woken up by unexplainable noises. I opened my eyes and saw that it was only 3 a.m. Clearly, I wasn't going to fall asleep easily, which was very unusual. I usually sleep like a baby the second my eyes are shut, but because my body was up and awake, I decided I would get something to eat from the kitchen. I got up and slowly walked down the hallway, feeling like there was something different about my house. I could feel it. With every step, something mysterious followed right behind. I suddenly could feel a cold breeze hitting me in the face, and as I followed this breeze, I saw with pure shock and terror that the front door of my house was completely open wide. It swayed back and forth slightly from the wind pushing against it. I stood there for a moment in horror, but snapped out of it and closed the door, making sure to lock it tight. The scariest part was that I always leave the door locked shut, so somebody must have forced it open somehow. But without making a big sound, I was sure everyone would have heard someone forcing the door open. Thoughts were traveling through my mind at the speed of light, but I knew that right now we needed to leave the house. It was definitely not safe. But as I was about to run and wake everyone up, I heard a low, guttural growl that almost gave me a heart attack. Standing a few feet behind me was the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. It was huge. It was furry. It was unreal. In that moment, one word swirled around my head unrelentingly. Dogman. I could see it. Its dog-like appearance mixed with that of a brute beast. Although some parts of it looked thin and unfed, others looked muscular and threatening. It was in a class all of its own. It breathed heavily, its eyes glowing ever so slightly, fixated on me. From the looks of it, my Temu package had arrived, but it was not what I was expecting. For once, I hoped my package wouldn't come, that it would be some sort of scam, but that just wasn't true. The dogman growled a little more, taking a huge step forward on its bulky hind legs. I took a step back, almost falling backwards. Its presence almost completely drained all my energy. The dogman gave a loud, indescribable roaring noise that almost made me deaf and came even closer to where I was. In a flash, the hallway lights went on as my son ran to the scene in a panic. He stopped as soon as he saw the creature, and I turned to look at him with increased annoyance. My grandchildren followed behind, and with wide eyes, one asked if it was a werewolf and where it had come from. Actually, I told them, that's what I ordered off Temu. You what? My son yelled, but then piped down as the dogman crouched aggressively, looking ready to do something. My son, in a low, non-aggressive sounding tone, told me to open the door so that he could try to get the dogman to leave the house. With no other options available, I did what he said, slowly and carefully. But when I opened the door, the dogman leaped forward at me, claws ready to slice me. I slid out of the way, and it slid forward out the door. My son raced to shut it, and almost flew forward as the dogman pushed against it. The grandchildren looked scared out of their minds as they watched while holding each other. After a couple of minutes of trying, it seemed either uninterested or bored, and left to who knows where. We all agreed to not sleeping for the rest of the night, and not ever ordering anything that looked even remotely suspicious. I know I never expected to be delivered an actual creature. I contacted Temu about it, and they never admitted to anything. When I tried looking for the Dogman product again, It disappeared as though it never existed. To this day, I'm very hesitant about buying most things, and maybe after this, you are too. Let's hope that you never end up seeing anything like I did, because that kind of experience is something like out of a horror film. So, would you order off Temu? The camping trip with my family was meant to be a peaceful escape from life's daily annoyances, but little did I know it would soon transform into an unforgettable and chilling experience. We arrived at the campsite with increasing excitement and started setting up our tents and chatting with each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a glow upon the forest, we gathered around the crackling campfire, its warm, flickering light dancing playfully on our faces. The night air was laced with the earthy scent of pine and the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. The symphony of crickets and distant hooting of owls created a serene ambience that usually lulled me into a peaceful slumber. However, that night, tranquility gave way to an unsettling aura as the campfire's flames seemed to lose their cheerful vigor. Lying in my large tent, I noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. I suddenly couldn't hear any crickets, owls, or anything else that showed signs of life in the forest, just my own breathing. An eerie stillness settled over the forest, and a strange unease crept into my bones. My family members were in their tents and had fallen asleep almost instantly. Just as I was beginning to drift into sleep, my ears perked up at the sound of a distant growl. At first, I dismissed it as an ordinary forest noise, perhaps a wandering animal or the echo of a nocturnal creature's call. But the growl persisted, and it seemed to grow closer, more distinct. It was a low, guttural sound, causing the fine hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. My heart quickened its pace, and I dared not move, afraid to draw any attention to myself. Even though I was feeling apprehensive, I couldn't help but wonder what it was that was lurking in the dark. So I got out of my tent and walked into the lonely forest. Unfortunately, it didn't take me long to find what was making the growling noises. Deciding it'd be best to turn back and go to sleep, I stopped from going deeper into the forest and was about to turn around. But that was when I saw it. There it stood, a monstrous form bathed in shadow, just beyond the reach of the dwindling campfire's light. My breath caught in my throat, and my pulse pounded like the thunderous hooves of a stampede. The creature, unlike anything I'd ever seen, seemed like a haunting amalgamation of a massive, ferocious canine and a man. Its eyes glowed an unsettling red hue, piercing the darkness like fiery embers. Rows of razor-sharp teeth glistened maliciously, and its breath came out in growls that reverberated through the trees, sending fear coursing through my veins. In that fleeting moment, as my wide eyes locked with the dogman's haunting gaze, I felt like an intruder into an ancient world, a trespasser amid the realms of folklore and legend. My mind struggled to comprehend the creature's existence, my thoughts ricocheting between rationality and the supernatural. Monsters aren't real, silly, I thought to myself. You're clearly seeing things. Fear paralyzed me for a moment, but a survival instinct took over, urging me to flee before too late. Without a second thought, I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, guided only by the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The darkness seemed to envelope me like a suffocating shroud, but I pushed forward, knowing that the safety of our campsite was the only sanctuary left for me. Breathless and wide-eyed, I burst into my family's tent, trying to explain what I had just witnessed without taking the time to catch my breath. My voice trembled as I recounted the encounter with the terrifying dogman, but their sleepy eyes looked at me with disbelief. They assured me it was probably just my imagination running wild because of the spooky forest. Annoyed, they told me to go back to sleep and brushed off my concerns, attributing them to nothing more than the imaginings of an overactive mind. Could you believe this? Reluctantly, I crawled back into my tent, still trembling with fear and uncertainty. I could hear the faint crackling of the campfire and the rhythmic breathing of my family, but my mind was fixated on the chilling encounter I just experienced. Every rustle of leaves or snapping twig outside amplified my anxiety, making sleep feel like an impossible feat. As I finally forced myself to lay down and close my eyes, I swear I saw its shadow against my tent and heard it sniffing the tent and growling softly. And hoping it was my eyes and ears playing tricks on me, I forced my eyes shut, curled into a ball, and stayed as still as humanly possible. It felt like an eternity before slumber finally found me, but even in my dreams, the menacing image of the dogman haunted me. Its red eyes stared into my soul, and its growls echoed into the depths of my subconscious. I tossed and turned, unable to escape the clutches of the night's unsettling encounter. Morning eventually came, bringing with it a sense of relief and security. The sun's warm embrace brushed away the last remnants of darkness, and as we hiked back to civilization, the tranquility of the day began to soothe my troubled mind. Yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that the dogman might still be lurking in the shadows, watching us from afar. When we got home, I tried to convince myself that maybe I just imagined the whole thing. But a part of me couldn't forget what I saw and heard that night. It would always be a mysterious and scary memory, a strange encounter with something I couldn't explain, something that made me see the wild forest in a whole new way. It taught me to be respectful of nature and its mysteries, and that sometimes things can be way scarier than we ever imagined. After all, think about it, all it ever did was stare back. But after learning about the existence of other entities and never before, what do I know? The country is often described as a peaceful and wonderful place, but after the experience I had with my grandmother, I don't think of it as being very peaceful anymore. Just the opposite, actually. And it's because of the other things that live there. I was just your average teenage girl visiting her grandparents' house during summer break. I didn't think I'd be doing too much while I was there, mostly just helping my grandmother with her chores, like I had during other times. Anyways, my dad dropped me off at her house, and I was about to give her a hug when she suddenly shouted at me. "Don't take a single step forward. Stay back," she cried out. Alarmed, I fell backwards and followed her eyes as she looked down. Creeping out of the bushes that were right next to her porch was a black cat with golden-looking eyes. I recognized that cat instantly because it was her cat, named Ruffles. It's been a while since that day, but I could have sworn then, and could swear now, that I noticed her glaring at them. But she quickly stopped and started laughing out loud. "I'm just pulling your leg," she giggled. "Yeah, real funny," I sarcastically laughed. But even though she'd gone back to being her usual cheerful, quirky self, I could tell that something wasn't quite right. As I was thinking that, my grandmother went back inside, and Ruffles rubbed against my leg affectionately. I picked her up and went inside after Grandma. As we were chatting energetically, she told me about the grand adventures she'd have while taking care of her garden. Personally, I've never cared much for plants, and I probably have the fastest record for killing one in less than a week. But I had to admit, my grandmother made it sound and feel fun. I remember laughing as she told me that one time she thought a wolf had hidden in one of her bushes as she was repotting a succulent outside. Now, before I go on, I need to let you know that her tone had gotten deeper and darker with every word. She told me that she thought she'd heard whimpering coming from it, and decided it must have been a dog. She approached it slowly, trying to calm it down, but when she was right in front of the bush, the sound suddenly stopped. She then heard the whimpering noise a bit farther away. Thinking that the animal could be hurt, she followed the sound around her house and went into her backyard. Being that she lives in the country, there's a lot of forest everywhere, and her backyard leads right into it. As she finally thought that she'd come closer to the source of the sound, once again it got farther and was coming straight from in the forest. She knew right then and there that something much more was going on. I remember how she told me it was like something was watching her, and how she felt uneasy being in her own backyard. And after she thought she heard the sound come closer to her again, she rushed back inside her house and stayed there all night. But she couldn't sleep a wink that night and kept hearing the same whimpering voice outside her bedroom window. And even though she thought that it was coming from like somewhere away, she could have sworn that she heard another noise, and it sounded like a person's voice calling out her name. Like something straight out of a horror movie, and I honestly couldn't believe it. I just brushed it off as one of her stories and told her that she had a big imagination. She laughed and agreed, going off to the kitchen to make me some lunch, and I spent some quality time with Ruffles. As I was petting her and giving her belly rubs, I saw something dark on my hand that felt wet. I brought it up to my face and gasped in surprise. "Grandma! Grandma! I think Ruffles hurt herself." I sat her down on the couch and pushed Grandma over to where she was, but they were gone. I showed her my hand, and she looked at it in some kind of daze. Then she went back into the kitchen as though I'd said nothing, and I sat back down stunned, wondering what her silence meant. It got darker, and my grandmother finally finished making dinner. We sat at the table in a new silence that I wasn't used to from her. Then she got up, pushed back the window blinds from the kitchen window, looked through, let them fall back, and walked over to me. And in a somewhat faint voice, she spoke. "Ruffles is definitely outside again. If you see her, don't let her in." "What? What are you saying? She's always allowed in," I replied. My grandmother shook her head, and I could feel the tension in the room grow. I asked her why she said that, and she didn't answer. Then I asked her again, and she shut her eyes, not saying anything. Furious, I told her that if she didn't tell me, I would let her back in. And the second after I said that, she shouted out the one thing I would never have been prepared to hear. "Because that's not Ruffles." Blood drained from me. I felt cold and frail. I fumbled my words as I tried to ask her what she meant, and was as frozen as a statue. "Do you know what a skinwalker is?" my grandmother asked. I shook my head, and she told me that apparently they're monsters that take the skin of other animals and wear them. She told me that that's all she knew about them, and that they were dangerous creatures that lived around her house. At first, she didn't know what to think of the strange noises she heard, but then she heard from the few neighbors miles away from her about them, and that was when she understood. "So, you're saying that a skinwalker to Ruffles?" I was trying hard not to say the words I really didn't want to hear, but I knew that I could never escape from the truth. Having no strength to stay up, after hearing what happened to Ruffles, I went off to the room I'd be sleeping in. It was right next to my grandmother's, and it had a window right across my bed. That night, I tossed and turned and had horrible nightmares about Ruffles. I had even woken up and thought I saw Ruffles, no, the skinwalker, using Ruffles' eyes to stare at me through the bedroom window. But I passed out too quickly to really know. All I can confirm is that I felt like I was really sick. A few days passed, and neither Grandma nor me had seen the missing cat. Nothing creepy happened, and it was nice to finally have some good days. The next day, I packed up my stuff as I was waiting for Dad to come pick me up. I gave a hug goodbye to my grandmother and was about to go into the car when I mysteriously stopped. I really can't explain why I suddenly stopped. It's like my body sensed something and immediately reacted to it. I turned to face the forest and saw Ruffles crouched down next to a tree, staring intently at me. It's like the eyes were staring into my very being, but for some reason I didn't feel fear. "Goodbye, Ruffles," I whispered. I waved a quick goodbye, not to the Skinwalker, but to her. She had been a great cat, and I would never forget her. I got in the car, and as Dad drove away, I watched my grandmother smiling. "See you," she yelled. But I noticed something. She had never opened her mouth once. She had just been waving. So I'm guessing it must have come from it, the Skinwalker. Nowadays, I make sure to visit as much as possible, mostly for my grandmother's sake. So far, I haven't been having any other encounters with it. But why would I? I would hope for anybody the country remains a peaceful, amazing place. Because they are out there, and they are extreme. Dear younger brother, it's me, Max. I'm writing this letter because I want to explain why I'm moving from my house to somewhere else. Anywhere else, honestly. I know that you must be upset that I'm not answering your calls or trying to speak with you in person, but read this and I promise you'll understand. You may not believe this, but I swear on our parents' names that nothing written here is fake. With that said, this is a story of 3 days ago, of when I made the biggest mistake of my life. As I write this, I'm on a plane to who knows where, and who knows whether or not it will find me. Let's begin. My day started out incredibly boring, to be honest. I'd eaten breakfast, put on new clothes, and was about to go into a virtual meeting with my boss. As I went into my room and was about to open up my computer, I heard rapping at my door. Not somebody rapping, of course. I mean somebody knocking. You never were good at knowing the meaning of words, brother. Anyways, I immediately went to my phone to access my security cameras and saw a medium-sized box lying on the stairs. My cameras record any movement they detect for a couple seconds, as you already know. So I went into the history of what they recorded and clicked on the most recent one. On my phone, I could see a black figure dressed in an oversized dark brown coat and wearing a big backpack walking up to my door. They slid their backpack off their shoulder, looked both ways, and took something out of their backpack, presumably the package. I couldn't tell what they did after that, because when they opened their backpack, the camera feed suddenly got blurry and a little glitchy. By the time the camera went back to normal, the person was gone, as though they'd vanished into thin air. I should have thought the whole thing was strange, but I guess the meeting was the main focus of my thoughts at the time. Remember what happened with me and that pizza last year? It was like that. I sped to the door and looked through the peephole, seeing nothing but the box, and opened up the door. The box looked like it had been handled a little rough, but I didn't care much because I had no idea what was inside in the first place. I don't buy many things, but you already knew that I'm a bit of a minimalist. I figured that you or Mom had bought something for me. As though I was in a rush, I tried to pick up the box and almost fell forward when my hands realized the full weight of the box. It was insanely heavier than it looked. I remember mumbling under my breath, "Geez, did they manage to fit a whole couch in this box?" Slowly this time, I picked up the box and heaved it onto the kitchen table. Annoyed, I huffed that whatever's in the box had better be worth it and ripped it open with my bare hands. Okay, I admit, some scissors helped a little too. Then I reached my hand in and pulled out a small piece of paper. It said, in poor handwriting, that what was in the box was now mine. And when I flipped the paper over, I was surprised to find a weird poem written on the back. It goes a little like this. In moonlight's pale and eerie glow, where whispered legends tend to grow, there walks a being strange and wild, the creature feared by every child. Be strong or be weak, the power inside can make you complete. Taken straight from a monster, though thought to be God. Open right up and prepare for a shock. Must you never reveal your being through liquid contact. Sounds like it came from some kid or bored teenager, doesn't it? Yeah, I thought so too. After all, moments like that only really come from movies, not the real world, right? Or maybe there's something more that we just don't think about. Maybe some events in movies do hold some sort of truth. Ha, that'd be a thought. Honestly, the foreshadowing poem only made me want to check out what was in the box more than before. So I was about to reach my hand into it to check it out when my phone suddenly rang and got my attention. I will let you know that the strangeness got stranger. My boss called me, telling me that I would be getting a promotion for my great efforts. Then $10,000 just appeared in my bank account. And the good things just never seemed to stop. Some family members sent me some gifts through the mail, and one even called saying that they had apparently found our dad. How long had it been since he'd last appeared? Good fortune just kept coming to me left and right. And for a person like me, who has an average life with more downs than ups a lot of the time, it was mega suspicious. Though it did feel really good at the same time. I went to sleep having forgotten about the box, and had the first negative thing happen to me all day. Or rather, all night. I must have been crouched behind some kind of bush or something. I don't know who I was or how I knew, but for some reason I knew I was watching someone. A few minutes passed by, and 3 people emerged from the darkness wearing colors in the pitch black night. Thinking about it, I have no idea how I could even see them. And I also have no idea how they were even able to see each other with it being so dark. But they could, and it seemed like they had something sharp in their hands. I saw them stick the thing in their arms and then wipe their hands all along the forest floor. They did all of this while chanting some language that made all the crickets, owls, and sound drain from the fort. Hearing them say the words pounded a dark energy into me, and I almost felt like passing out, but I managed to stay conscious. They eventually stopped, and when they did, one of them threw a match, I think, on the ground, and the grass burst into a controlled flame that stayed where it was and didn't spread to anything else. After chanting some more, something flew out of the fire into the ground, smoking a lot. It was faintly glowing, but the brightness that came off of it was not like a normal light. It was light, but it was also dark as well. So it was a dark light, if that makes sense. One of the people went over to it and picked it up while the other 2 stopped their chanting and seemed to be prepared to end the ritual. But then, the fire burned a dark red and black, and emerging from that fiery inferno was a beast unlike anything I'd ever seen. But if I had to compare it to an animal, it'd be a goat for sure. I couldn't see all of it, but I could tell it had a goat-like head and menacing eyes that tore through the soul. I don't know who started running first, the strange people or me, but I do know that we all started screaming around the same time. The creature most likely pursued one of us, but I woke up before I could look behind me to tell. I basically jolted awake immediately thinking of the box. I thought of the box, the out of nowhere good luck I was having, and my dream. I can't keep it. I thought to myself. It just felt like there was something bad connected to it. I went to the kitchen and found the box where I'd left it on the table. I was thinking that before I would throw the box away, I would at least see what was inside, since I'd never gotten the chance to before. So there I was, standing in front of the partly open box, reaching my hand to pull out whatever was inside. You know how shows sometimes show characters moving in slow motion? Well, the whole moment was just like that, with me reaching my hand into the box in slow motion. I should have figured something was wrong with that. I felt my hand grip something ice cold and smooth, kinda slippery too. I was trying to grip around the thing, whatever it was, when my hand suddenly felt something pointy. My hand pulled back faster than I could blink. I turned my head to look at it and saw a red liquid dripping down it slowly and onto the floor. Pain shot like a bullet through my hand as I gripped my wrist with my other hand in pain. But that wasn't the worst of it. When the pain finally subsided and I looked into the box, I found there was nothing inside. Then things got crazy. Back in my room, I heard a big boom sound, like someone had taken the heaviest thing in my room and slammed it into the floor. I trusted my instincts and ran outside the house. This unknown fear coursed through my body and was forcing me to get out of my house and away from the area. I sprinted past streets I knew and didn't know without any reason why, at least not until I slowed down at last and looked behind me. Standing still and peeking from behind a big bush in front of someone's house was the creature I'd seen in my dreams. I know you might never believe me, brother, but this is all unfortunate fact. It really was a man fused with a goat, but let me try to describe it with as much detail as I can remember. The first thing I remember is that it was the biggest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. No normal person could compare to its height. It had a goat's head with soul-piercing, demonic-looking eyes, and its legs were kind of like a goat's with hooves, but I couldn't really see for sure. At times, its legs blended together to look like dark shadow, but the rest of it looked human enough. Well, as human as a monster like that can look. Its fur was a dirty gray with lots of darker areas that seemed to radiate the dark light I had seen in my dreams. There's no way it didn't come from the underworld. I won't believe that it came from anywhere else. It scared the living daylights out of me. Just one look at it and I almost collapsed. I don't think people understand the true meaning of intimidation until they've seen what I've seen. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say it's like being a rabbit who's about to be eaten alive by a bear. Anyways, for the next 3 minutes, I had a staring contest with the monster, and we both didn't move an inch. I tried to say at least a word to it, but couldn't muster up enough courage. Still not believing what I was seeing, I blinked, and it vanished. And I could tell it wasn't gone. I turned my head around, looking 360 degrees, and spotted it hiding but closer to where I was. One blink and it disappeared again. I swung myself around and saw it once more, much closer this time, and with another uncontrollable blink, it was gone. It's messing with me, I thought to myself, but obviously this wasn't the fun kind. I dashed away from the area and felt some otherworldly force shove me to the ground, causing me to scrape at my leg pretty badly on the concrete. I ran through the pain anyways, and into a nearby foresty area. As you probably remember, it was the forest that was part of the park we used to play at a lot. I rushed through the many thin trees and hid behind one, out of breath and panting. Suddenly, my phone rang loudly, which almost made me pass out. and I answered to the sound of random voices all screaming over each other. Under the large group of voices all shouting random things, there was one similar to mine saying something over and over and over. 3 short words.
You will pay.
I looked behind me, and the Goatman's face was towering over me and looking down. It opened its mouth and let out a death-curdling scream that would have turned all my hairs white if I wasn't so focused on running. As it chased me, I looked for some person that I could yell to get help at, but strangely, I couldn't see anybody. Whether this was its doing or not, some kind of trick or something, I really don't know. To cut it short, I ended up locking myself in my room at night, holding various weapons to protect myself with, and prepared to move to someplace safe. Right now, I'm not even sure if I'll make it to see another day, and that's why I wrote you this letter. I'm hoping that this will be better than texting you because the thing was somehow able to manipulate my device and could probably do it again to figure out where I'm headed. Well, anyways, that's my story. I really do hope to see you. Pray for me, will you? With the greatest of love, your dear brother. I hope to see you soon, and I hope I won't be bringing that thing with me. That's another story done. Thanks for taking the time to listen to it, and hopefully you had a good experience. See you on the flip side.